Every metric you track will eventually start lying to you, and there's a name for exactly why. It's called Goodhart's Law. Named after economist Charles Goodhart, it's usually summarized in one line. When a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. That single sentence explains an enormous amount of dysfunction inside real companies, and most managers have felt its effects without ever knowing the name for it. Here's what's actually happening underneath that sentence. The moment people know exactly what number is being judged, and know that their bonus, their promotion, or their job security depends on that number, they stop trying to achieve the underlying goal directly. They start optimizing the number itself. Sometimes those two things line up perfectly. Often they don't. And the gap between them is where Goodhart's Law lives. Think about a call center. Management wants short call times because shorter calls, in theory, mean efficient service and lower staffing costs. So they measure average call length and reward the agents who keep it low. What happens next is completely predictable once you see the incentive clearly. Agents start rushing customers off the phone. They transfer people to other departments instead of solving the issue themselves. They hang up on the tail end of long or difficult calls. The average call length goes down exactly as designed. Customer problems go unsolved at a higher rate. The metric moved. The mission didn't. Or take a sales team measured only on number of deals closed, with no adjustment for deal size or customer fit. Salespeople quickly learn that 10 tiny, easy deals count the same as one big, complicated, valuable one, but take a fraction of the effort. So they chase volume. They discount aggressively to close fast. They avoid the harder, slower, higher value accounts that actually matter to the business, because those accounts hurt their number in the short term even though they help the company in the long term. Again, the visible metric climbs. The actual value created quietly falls. Or picture a software team measured on lines of code written per week, an old but still used proxy for productivity. Engineers under that system learn, consciously or not, that longer code scores better than short, elegant, well-designed code. So functions get bloated. Simple problems get solved with unnecessarily complicated solutions. Code that could be 10 clean lines becomes 80 messy ones, because 80 beats 10 on the dashboard. The measured output goes up. The actual engineering quality goes down, and the mess becomes someone else's problem to maintain 6 months later. Or think about a recruiting team measured on time to hire, how many days it takes to fill an open role. That number is genuinely useful to track. But make it the only thing that matters, and recruiters will quietly lower the bar to close positions faster. Marginal candidates get pushed through, reference checks get rushed, the role gets filled quickly, the time to hire number looks great on the recruiting dashboard, and 6 months later, the manager who actually has to work with that new hire discovers the corner that got cut. Or a marketing team measured purely on number of leads generated, with no filter for whether those leads ever had any real chance of buying anything. Volume is easy to inflate. Widen the targeting, loosen the qualification criteria, run ads to anyone who will click, and the lead count climbs beautifully, while the sales team downstream drowns in unqualified names that were never going to convert. In every one of these cases, the visible number is trivially easy to move in a direction that has nothing to do with the actual business result anyone wanted. Notice the pattern repeating across all of these. In every one of them, the number technically improved, while the real underlying goal it was supposed to represent, quality service, valuable sales, good software, quietly got worse. That gap is the entire mechanism of Goodhart's Law in a nutshell. And here's the part worth sitting with for a second. This usually isn't people being dishonest on purpose. Most employees aren't cartoonishly twirling a mustache trying to sabotage the company. It's simpler and more human than that. People are extremely good at optimizing for whatever is explicitly measured and rewarded, full stop, regardless of whether that measurement was ever a perfect stand-in for what actually matters. Give a smart, motivated person a number to hit, and they will find the shortest path to hitting it. That is not a character flaw. That is exactly what a well-functioning brain does when you hand it an incentive. The problem was never the employee. The problem is the design of the measurement itself. Part of why this keeps happening is that managers are almost always working with lagging indicators standing in for something they actually can't observe directly. You can't watch every customer interaction, every sales conversation, every line of reasoning an engineer went through. So you pick a number that's supposed to correlate with the thing you care about, and you track that instead, because it's the only practical option available. The trap is forgetting that the number was always a proxy, a stand-in, not the actual goal, and treating it as if it were the goal itself the moment it gets written into a bonus formula. There's actually a broader, older idea sitting behind Goodhart's law that's worth knowing, called Campbell's law, named after social scientist Donald Campbell. Campbell's version says that the more a quantitative social indicator gets used for important decisions, the more it becomes subject to corruption pressures, and the more it distorts the very process it was meant to monitor. Goodhart's law is basically the sharper, punchier business version of that same underlying truth. Once a number becomes the thing people are judged on, the number stops being a clean window into reality and starts being a thing people manage directly, sometimes instead of managing the reality it was supposed to reflect. There's also an old story, often told in economics classes, sometimes called the Cobra effect, about a colonial government that supposedly offered a bounty for dead cobras to control a snake population, only to have people start breeding cobras specifically to kill them and collect the reward, so that when the bounty program was cancelled, the breeders released their now worthless cobras, and the snake population ended up worse than when the program started. Whether every detail of that particular story is historically precise or has picked up some folklore along the way, the shape of it is instantly recognizable to anyone who has run an incentive program in a real company, because the underlying dynamic is exactly Goodhart's law. Reward the proxy, and people will produce more of the proxy, not more of the thing you actually wanted. Education is where this dynamic has been discussed most openly, under the well-known label, teaching to the test. Once a school's funding, reputation, or staff bonuses depend heavily on standardized test results, instruction time predictably narrows toward whatever the test covers, and away from anything valuable the test doesn't happen to measure. That's the generic, widely discussed version of the problem. What happened in one American school district took it a full step further, past merely narrowing instruction into directly altering the results themselves. Now here's the part nobody expects. And it's not a small business anecdote. It's one of the most well-documented cases of Goodhart's law playing out at scale in an American public institution. In the Atlanta public school system in the 2000s, teachers and administrators were evaluated heavily on standardized test scores with real consequences attached, including bonuses and job security tied directly to how those scores moved year over year. A state investigation later found that dozens of educators across a number of schools had physically erased and corrected students' wrong answers before submitting the standardized tests, directly inflating the results rather than improving the actual learning those results were supposed to represent. Several educators were later convicted of racketeering charges connected to the scheme. The test scores went up. On paper, the thing the test scores existed to measure, actual student learning, did not. None of this happened in a vacuum. It unfolded during an era of American education policy, built around the well-known federal No Child Left Behind law, where school funding, staff evaluations, and public reputation were explicitly tied to standardized test performance at a national level. That's important context, not an excuse. It shows the cheating wasn't some isolated character failure. It was what a high-stakes, single-metric incentive structure reliably produces once enough weight gets placed on one number at scale over enough years. Sit with the scale of that for a second. This wasn't one rogue employee gaming a system for personal gain. It was a structural response, across an entire institution, to a single number incentive system, from people who, in nearly every other context, would describe themselves as dedicated to their students. That's how strong the pull of Goodhart's law can be. It's not a fringe risk that only shows up in shady companies. It's a predictable, mechanical response to putting too much weight on one visible number. And it can show up inside institutions whose entire stated mission is the opposite of what the metric ended up producing. A similar dynamic played out, publicly and extensively documented, at a major American bank in the mid-2010s, when aggressive internal sales quotas pushed employees toward opening large numbers of accounts customers never asked for, just to keep pace with cross-selling targets tied to their jobs. Regulators eventually stepped in, Substantial fines followed, thousands of employees were terminated, and the bank's leadership faced public congressional hearings over it. Different industry, completely different specifics, but structurally it's the identical failure. Set one aggressive number as the target that careers depend on, and people will find a way to move that number, even when moving it honestly isn't really an option anymore. Two industries as different as public education and consumer banking arriving at the exact same failure mode is itself the strongest evidence that this isn't an industry-specific problem. It's a structural one, built into what happens whenever a single number carries too much weight. This is where it's worth pausing on why this matters so specifically for managers, not just as an interesting behavioral quirk, but as an operational hazard sitting inside your own dashboards right now. Every manager runs on metrics, because metrics are how you manage things you can't personally watch every hour of every day. But the moment you pick a single metric and make it the thing people's careers ride on, you've quietly created an entire incentive to game exactly that metric. You didn't do it on purpose. Almost nobody does. It happens because a single number is simple, easy to report upward, and easy to put on a slide. Simplicity is the whole appeal, and simplicity is exactly what makes a single metric so exploitable. This is also worth noting exactly what's behind the vanity metrics problem that gets talked about a lot in startups and marketing teams. App downloads that never turn into active users. Website traffic that never converts into customers. Social media follower counts that never translate into revenue. None of those numbers are fake, and none of them are useless either. But treated as the headline measure of success, they reward whoever can inflate the top-of-funnel number, whether or not anything of actual value comes out the other end. It's the exact same Goodhart's law failure, just wearing a growth marketing costume instead of a call center or classroom one. So what actually works instead? The core fix isn't abandoning metrics. That's neither realistic nor useful. It's refusing to let any one metric stand alone as proof that the job got done. Pair speed with quality. If you measure how fast a call center agent resolves calls, measure it alongside customer satisfaction or repeat contact rate, so rushing someone off the phone stops looking like a win. Pair sales volume with customer retention, so closing a fast, low-value deal that churns in 2 months stops scoring the same as closing a durable, valuable one. Pair engineering output with defect rate or code review feedback, so bloated code stops quietly outscoring clean code. In each case, the second metric acts as a guardrail against gaming the first one. There's a broader version of this same principle used in serious performance management systems, sometimes called a balanced scorecard approach, where a handful of metrics from different angles, financial, customer, internal process, and growth, get tracked together specifically so that no single number can be gamed in isolation without another number in the set flinching in response. You don't need the full formal framework to use the underlying insight. You just need to ask, for any metric you're about to hand someone as a target, what's the cheapest way a smart, motivated person could move this number without actually improving the real thing I care about? If you can answer that question easily, you've just found your blind spot, and you should add a second metric that closes it before you roll the target out, not after you discover the damage. It also helps to notice which of your metrics are leading and which are lagging. A lagging indicator, like quarterly revenue or annual customer churn, tells you what already happened, usually too late to fix the specific thing that caused it. A leading indicator, like weekly active usage or first call resolution rate, gives you an earlier signal, closer to the actual behavior driving the outcome. Some organizations formalize this further with what's often called a North Star metric, a single number chosen specifically because it's hard to fake without genuinely delivering value, paired deliberately with supporting metrics that catch the ways it could still be gamed. You don't need the branded framework. You need the underlying discipline. Know which of your numbers are early warning signals, and never let a lagging vanity number be the only thing anyone's actually accountable for. It's also worth building in a simple habit of periodically auditing your own metrics for exactly this failure mode, asking whether the number has quietly become disconnected from the outcome it was supposed to represent, the same way test scores in Atlanta became disconnected from actual learning. Metrics don't stay honest forever just because they were honest when you first set them up. People adapt. Systems get gamed slowly, then all at once. A metric that was a clean proxy for performance 2 years ago can be a fully hollowed-out number today, still climbing steadily upward while telling you almost nothing true. Here's my own take on why this deserves more attention than most managers give it. The instinct to simplify. To boil performance down to one clean number on a dashboard feels like good management. It looks decisive. It looks data-driven. But a single number, treated as the whole truth, is one of the easiest things in an organization to quietly hollow out, precisely because everyone under it knows exactly what's being watched, and human beings are relentlessly good at satisfying exactly what's being watched. Real management discipline isn't picking the cleanest single metric you can find. It's accepting that any target worth setting probably needs a second metric standing guard right next to it. So, if you're a manager walking away with one concrete thing to actually do this week, it's this. Take your team's single most important tracked metric, whatever number gets reported up the chain most often, and ask what a person could sacrifice to make that number look better without actually helping the business. Then find the second metric that would catch that sacrifice and start tracking it alongside the first one immediately. A number that's easy to hit is rarely, by itself, proof that the real job got done. Hit follow if you've seen this happen at work.